Welcome to the Blue Leadership Podcast, hosted by Dennis Nayor, a retired multi-agency police chief from the state of New York. Blue Leadership is a podcast by law enforcement for law enforcement leaders, taking you inside the experiences and careers of public safety experts from across the country.
Maddie, thank you so much. Great to be back here, episode 38. And today's guest is Sergeant Grayson Smith of the City of Delta, British Columbia, Vancouver Police Department. He's been with the police department for 16 years, a patrol sergeant, which I always say is the most important rank within an agency because they really make all of the policies come alive, and they make sure that the department's functioning day to day in every call for service. Lots of interesting things to talk about. Before any further, Grayson, thank you for being here.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
One of the things that's going to make this a really interesting podcast is that you have done some things that are just different than any of my other guests. And the first thing I want to talk about is you've written a book, but not only a book, a children's book. Can you just talk a little bit about the book, what it's about, and what inspired you to author a book?
Sure. Yeah. So, it was a couple years ago, maybe about 15 years ago, it was Christmas time and I wanted to get a gift for my niece. And instead of getting something pink and plastic, I wanted to try to get something more meaningful. So I decided I was going to write and draw pictures for a storybook. It turns out I can't draw. So I wrote a story and I ended up connecting with an illustrator, a family friend of ours. And she was in art school wanting to be a children's illustrator. So we both had full-time jobs, but over the course of a few years, we put together a book. And the process of putting together the book was, it was labor intensive, especially on her part. So by the time we had these beautiful illustrations, I thought we should probably produce more than just one book for my niece. And I did what every clueless person does. You go online and try and figure out how to publish a book. And then I got carried away and got a business license and pretended to be an independent small press. So actually, that's the start of a publishing company that I began. And over the next few years, we sold books to family and friends and word of mouth. So over the next few years, it was a fake it until you make it type thing. And I ended up starting receiving submissions from people, from authors. And what I found was there's a lot of people like me who have full-time gigs elsewhere. They don't consider themselves authors, but they thought they had a story that they wanted to share with the world. They thought that would work. And so over the past 10 years, I've produced about 18, 19 books. Some of them I've written myself, but others are, from other authors and illustrators. And so there's been this sort of hobby project that has taken off. And I've gotten a cool opportunity we've built some educational resources. I've worked with some Indigenous groups to do language rejuvenation projects. So producing books in their language. It's been a really interesting, unique way to sort of have a creative outlet. At the same time as I was doing all this, I was actually working as a fatal crash investigator for a number of years. And children's books, specifically the types I write, which are silly and not nonsense, but close to it, it was a really good outlet to offset some of that tragedy and disaster that I was immersed in as a police officer. So like one book that I wrote is called There's a Norseman in the Classroom. And it's about a huge, hairy newcomer in a second grade classroom. Kind of inspired by events. My wife is a teacher, and so she would tell stories about that kind of stuff. It's about inclusion and exclusion, and it's given me an opportunity to go into schools and connect with students, probably 10 or 12,000 students. I've gotten a chance to talk about policing, bullying, the Special Olympics, which is an organization that I really love, creative writing is something that I love, and it's been a good hobby for me to sort of offset some of that stuff that you deal with in policing.
That's amazing. So just from a curiosity standpoint, are you self-published or did a publishing company pick you up?
No, I guess technically it's self-published. So self-published is, I guess you got to say that I'm the press. I'm the small press that produces the books, but that would be self-published.
And so do people purchase them if they want on Amazon, or how would they get these books if they wanted to have an opportunity to share them with their children?
Amazon, we fulfill Amazon orders and stuff like that, but we also, through mostly Canadian book distributors, we're in bookstores and that kind of stuff. So like I said, the fake it till you make it. Like I don't feel like a children's author, and I also don't feel like a publisher. But I guess when you take a step back, you realize, you've done that, and it took a while for me to get my head around that. But yeah.
So interestingly, so you're a graduate of the University of San Diego's MS Lepsel program, a proud graduate, the law enforcement and public safety leadership. And one of the most important skills for any student to walk away with from a master's degree is the ability to write well. And you like to write creative writing. Does the time in the master's program help your writing, or did your writing help you in the master's program, or how did that work?
Yeah, there was not a ton of overlap between the program and children's books, but I would say the ability to break down a big message into a small, I think that was one of the things that I learned that was different than the undergrad degree is I'm not trying to build out a massive report, a massive paper. The Lepsel program gave you an opportunity to practice those short, concise, like get a big idea into a short memo type writing process. So I would say, there's some overlap for sure. I think that some of the creative writing, the interest that I have in creative writing helped me at least be willing to sit down and crack off assignments as they came up. So, yeah.
Yeah, and what a difference. You're not citing and footnoting or referencing. You're just being able to create from your mind. So I can see how cathartic and just different that is from what you're doing as an accident reconstructionist and at the master's level of graduate writing, which requires footnotes, endnotes, citations, and all that.
Yeah.
How are your book? Again, more curiosity, and if I'm thinking it, I'm sure the listeners and viewers are too. How long are the books? What's the length?
Yeah, so the books are mostly children's picture books. So your length is relatively short, 25, 30 pages. The content is short, usually around, most of what's amazing for me was I can't draw, but when you watch an illustrator kind of craft breathe new life into your story, doing something that you can't do, it's pretty amazing. So most of the stories most of the books that we produce are picture books. So the illustrations play a huge role in that, and then that also just limits the number of the number of pages. But yeah,
that's great. And you said you've written 18 to 19 of them. So I guess my last final follow-up curiosity: how long does it take you to complete one book from start to finish?
Yeah. So, well, I'll say this: like when it comes to sales, I shouldn't be quitting my day job at any point here, but so I've written probably 3 or 4 books, and the others I've produced. I would say that when you have, if you just have a story and you need to go find an illustrator, find an editor, find a publisher, so not a publisher, a printer, and then do all the marketing, it takes a while. Maybe it takes a 6 to 8 months to sort of pull together the whole project. But when you have all those things in place, I've also worked with groups who have brought me everything that, especially language projects where I don't have any say and I can't give any feedback on that. That stuff was just handed to me, and takes a few months to produce those. So, yeah.
Well, so it's obviously that your role as a law enforcement and being involved in the community shows through what you do with the books and in schools. But now take that a step further. You also do things with youth camps.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Can you talk about that? Share what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up sort of as a young adult in my early adulthood, just being involved with kids. I love kids. I like doing things that kids do. So I worked a lot with different youth programs, with summer camps, with some sports things, coaching and things like that. So it felt like, I had a lot of practice in doing those things even prior to becoming a police officer. And once I became a police officer, there was actually a police board member whose sons had gone through, or his son had gone through a camp that I had helped lead. And so she knew I had summer camp experience, and she recommended, hey, would you be willing to go up to northern British Columbia? There was a economic development group, part of a Indigenous, a First Nation group that were trying to create a summer camp, or not a summer camp, more like a employment camp, so that teenagers could come through, learn about resources and employment, and sort of get set for career trajectory stuff, which was not my, that wasn't my area of expertise, but running summer camp type environments was. And so I went up, and it was an awesome experience for me personally as well. But my job was to create a camp experience while other professionals came in and introduced different career opportunities for the youth up in a couple of remote areas in British Columbia. And yeah, it was a privilege to do that. And it was an interesting overlap between policing and sort of a camp experience. So, there's a tenuous relationship between many Indigenous groups, and policing in Canada. And so that was a interesting thing to navigate, even with some of the leaders who I went up to go serve, had a distrust for police in general. And there's something about a camp, sort of the full immersion camp experience, that is where there's no distractions around. You're out in the bush, and there's also nothing but each other to rely on. Those type of environments really they can cause deep trust to happen relatively quickly, and those relationships can last for quite a while, even if they're not local and they're not sustained like all the time as neighbors. So I was privileged to be part of that. In those, I did it for a couple of years. Those two camps, I watched some youth kind of step over barriers that might have caught their toes in other circumstances. I got a chance to introduce local law enforcement to the youth who initially had no time for the RCMP up there. But based on those relationships that happened in those camp experiences, they were willing to connect with the frontline police officers. And so there was some networking, I guess, in that way. But yeah, it was a privilege to be a part of it. And that was only for a couple of years. And, things shifted when it came to the economic development of the area. But it was a very cool opportunity to overlap policing and camp stuff.
Yeah, what a great community policing concept, and what a great way to create this bridge, like you said, between the police and those who may otherwise not be fond of them. So is any of that what led to my next question, your 40 under 40 award by the IACP, which, for the listeners and viewers who don't know, it's an amazing, prestigious award that recognizes law enforcement leaders who are under 40 years of age. And I believe they limit it to only 40 across the entire country, and people are nominated. Did that have anything to do with it, or did you do something else that brought you that special recognition?
Yeah, no, I actually, with regards to the IACP recognition, that had to do with some of the work that I was doing on road safety stuff. So, I should start by saying that policing is a unique career when it comes to recognitions and distinctions, because I think that a lot of officers legitimately feel like I was just doing my job, which is the case in this instance. Like I know that there's lots of women and men that I work with who would have done as good or better a job had they been in my role. It's just the timing just happened to be what it was. So in terms of the context for that distinction, there was in about 2017, Canada decided that they were going to legalize cannabis. And so there was a lot of concern specifically around road safety, high drivers, things like that. And I happened to be at least in my department, sort of, that was my area of work. So I had been trained as a DRE in 2015, which sort of is a drug recognition expert. It's sort of trained, it's training that people receive to sort of better recognize, interdict, and apprehend impaired drivers specific to drugs. Alcohol is, we've got tools, but drug recognition often requires some extra training, human training. So I had gotten that designation, and I had dove into that area of police work in the years leading up to this. And that included, I had become an SFST instructor. That's a standardized field sobriety test. Both of those programs were run through the IACP, so that there's some standardization when it comes to that. And so as Canada approached this legalization, I was involved in a few provincial level committees, so state level committees, where we were trying to figure out, in my opinion, the legislators didn't build a long enough runway for rolling this out. While the laws did increase some penalties for impaired driving stuff, which was great for us, it actually, we didn't have practical tools in place. So as a little side note, like we were told that there will be oral fluid screening devices available to us. So we will be able to use machines to test people's drug levels. However, none of the devices that existed had passed legislative approval. So for all intents and purposes, we didn't have the tools. By the time the tools started rolling out, we realized there's some limited utility, the cost for the rollout, the training, maintenance, all these things. We probably would be better suited to just stay with the standardized field sobriety tests, which again was the area that I was already working in. So my supervisor saw the opportunity for our department to sort of lend a hand to both our department, but also surrounding agencies. And he cut me loose for the year leading up to D-Day, legalization D-Day. And I taught maybe 25 or 30 courses, 4-day SFST courses, with a number of other instructors and other sort of impaired driving coordinators from different agencies. And the goal, the mandate from the province, I believe at the time, was that we needed to have about 1/3, or 35% of frontline officers needed to be trained in SFST prior to the rollout. And like our department, we really pushed it, and we got up to 65%, 70% of our frontline members got training. Also at the same time, for a short amount of time, I was the only drug recognition expert in my department. My department has about 200 or so sworn members. We jumped that number up to 12, which in comparison to some of our other partner agencies, of 1,000 members or so, they also had 10 to 15. So we were, at least when it came to training, we were really prepared when that December 2018 D-Day hit, for our department to be trained and ready to interdict impaired drivers. And I think, so in that way, you can kind of see this was just happened to be the role that I was playing at the time for the department. And then this external force of legalization happens. And, in British Columbia, there wasn't this apocalypse of high drivers everywhere. British Columbia in particular is known for being a bunch of potheads. So those people were already using cannabis if they were going to be using it. But what it did do for our department is it solidified us as as active partners at a provincial level with outside agencies. Like Delta Police Department cares about the mandates that are important to other groups, and we're ready to train and we're ready to lend a hand to people. It also, in some ways, built a culture within our own department of, we want our frontline officers to take road safety seriously. Like every time there's a community survey, our department rolls those out every few years. Traffic safety, road safety comes back as a very important concern for the community, and so we wanted to be a part of that. And then also, as I was working in some fatal crashes, the overlap between fatal crashes and impaired driving is undeniable, or at least for me, anecdotally, it was unmistakable for a bunch of the years that I was working at. So yeah, there's a bunch of reasons why we wanted to pour our effort and focus into that.
And that's what the IACP recognized, and they recognized its value. And I should add, the drug recognition expert training is a very hard training to come by. At least in the United States, my research had shown there was less than 1/4 of 1% of officers that was actually certified in that training.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you built that you had the training and that you built your agency up to 12 DREs, that's huge. And it just shows, I think, the emphasis toward roadside safety.
Yeah, it was, since then I've been able to become an instructor in the DRE program and gone to a few different places for it. So what's interesting about, my department versus other departments, specifically the RCMP, which is sort of a large agency in Canada that stretches across the country, is that oftentimes a municipal department in our area, people will go into a specialty section, and you get a few training courses, you get some expertise, and then you get rotated back out. And the value is that you pass that on to the frontline members on the road. But oftentimes you can lose that. And DREs and even SFSTs, those are one of those tools that officers sometimes say to themselves, well, I'm not in traffic anymore, so I don't need to keep that up, or I don't need to care about that anymore. And for me, it's been it's a professional designation that I want to maintain, and it's a cool opportunity to continue to get out there and help other agencies when you get called out to outside agencies or to your own department when there's a bad crash and you need to contribute. So anyways, that's something that's stayed with me.
Well, amazing. And congratulations, an awesome award, an awesome designation by such a large governing body such as the IACP. And obviously you've done a lot. You've done a lot in your personal life, and then with the children's books and the youth camps and the IACP 40 under 40 recognition. You're a patrol sergeant now, which I said at the beginning. To me, that is such an important rank, because a chief can have all the best policies and the ideas and visions, but if it's not carried out by the first line supervisor, the sergeant, they all fall flat. And so if you choose to go no further career-wise, you've already accomplished tremendous things. But my question to you is, do you have any additional career aspirations? And if so, what are they?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I think that I don't hold anything at the moment. I don't hold any career aspirations very tightly, but I'm open. So right now I assist when my watch commanders, or I guess we have staff sergeants. I think it's lieutenant is about the equivalent rank. So when my staff sergeant's away, I step up into that role and act as the watch commander for patrol. I like that. I would love for that to be a more confirmed position, regardless of the rank or the appointment. I enjoy that. Makes me, every time you get introduced to a new job, you feel a bit like a recruit again. So I'm in that baby stage of doing the watch composition, but I enjoy that. Also, I've spent the last 16 years in uniform, in terms of frontline, sort of in uniform. So, a lot of the specialty sections aren't necessarily available to me. Just having spent most of my time in either traffic or patrol. So, yeah, I mean, I honestly, I think one of the things that I learned or that distilled for me, was actually through the LEPSL program. It was what's your long-term goal, and when it comes to career goals, one thing that I left with out of the program was I really want to leave this career healthier than when I came. So you get these police officers, we get police officers who are typically high achievers, typically well-rounded, very capable, motivated individuals. And then we bring them into, you have to be competitive. And then you bring them into policing, and then everything shrinks down and becomes a policing thing. And then you leave, as a cop, and maybe not as well-rounded as you could have. But in that, there's all kinds of reasons for it, right? Scheduling and friendships and all that stuff. But for me, I would love to leave in the next 10 years, 15 years, whatever it ends up being, like as healthy in my mind, my spirit, my body, my finances, my family, friends, fitness, fun, all that kind of stuff. I want to make sure that I spend the next however long training for my retirement so that I'm in good shape. And so that's just a personal motivation. And part of the LEPSO program introduced, like, well, why can't that be your vision as a leader? Like, you want to make sure that your people are in that same position. So for me, both ways, like both the people who I work under and the people who I work over, I want to introduce that. So in some ways, that's my primary aspiration, is to make sure people, at least as far as it depends on me, people take that seriously and take that. Policing is not the Policing is a very important career, and I've loved it, and I continue to love it. It's not the only thing that makes us who we are, and so, you know, I guess I would say, if there's opportunities for me to have a wider influence within my department, whether or not that means going to, say, a section like HR administration as a sergeant or above, or continuing to climb the rank structure, I'm open to that. But I also want to make sure that I'm doing my current job well, which is taking care of myself and making sure that the people I work with are also taking care of themselves.
I love that. That is so important, everything you just said. And obviously in the LEPSO Contemporary Issues course, we have a whole module on wellness. And if the wellness component fails, everything else fails with it. And you're right, there's no value in getting through this very difficult career, challenging, whatever we want to call it, and then not being healthy mentally, physically, spiritually, as you stated. And it's hard because the policing profession is not infused with wellness. Everything about it, or so much about it, goes contrary to that. The hours you work, the situations you deal with, the things you're exposed to. If you're a supervisor, sometimes difficult employees. If you're not a supervisor, sometimes bad supervisors. There's so much that detracts from wellness. And so what you're saying has tremendous weight and value. If you can focus on that for yourself, if you can be in a position with a platform to bring it to those who are carrying out the mission, what more important job or aspiration could one have? So kudos. I'm fully supportive of that idea.
Sweet. Yeah. I mean,
what I wanted.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, please.
Well, I was just going to say, like, that the Contemporary Issues, I think, did introduce me. Some of those, the programming at LEPSO gave me, there's some stuff about the masters and perspective changes and things that were really beneficial. But some of the topics that I was introduced to, specifically like mindfulness-based resiliency training, which it interested me because I was already inclined that way. I was voted the most likely to go become a hippie on the Salt Spring Islands by my team. But anyways, diving more deeply into what does it take to sort of train myself for resilience, especially in the face of trauma and death when I was working in fatal crashes, and wellness. It just sort of, I know there's a bit of it's good. We should ride the wave. There's a bit of a push for agencies to make sure that their officers are well. And like, I want to support that for sure. But yeah, the opportunities that kind of came up through the LEPSO program were really helpful for me to engage my thinking. Based on some of those topics, I've gone off to different training sessions just on my own. The department's like, what are you doing? Well, I want to learn about this. And I think in January, I went down to Bend and worked with or attended a program with Mindful Badge, which I learned about from the LEPSO program, and engage. Again, it's that networking side of things that doesn't come naturally to me. I don't feel very comfortable doing it, but just sort of grit your teeth and get after it. You find that relationships build and things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah. And, I didn't even have part of our interview component to wellness, but I'm so glad it came up because it's so important to have that interwoven. And let's face it, like, you deal with accident reconstructions and fatalities, and not just obviously the loss of life, and then how the families that you have to speak to, and the grieving and the sadness. And if you don't do something to put up your own armor and shield to protect you, it's hard to absorb all that and stay well. So again, compliments for what you're doing, how you're doing it, sharing that with your officers. I think that's leadership, right? Tremendous leadership. And that goes into what I always like to ask the guests. Do you have a specific leadership philosophy that you adhere to or that resonates with you? and or also any books or podcasts that you follow that maybe the listeners or viewers can benefit from hearing?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I don't have a really what's the right word? Articulate leadership philosophy, but one topic in particular came up through the LEPSL program again was this idea of ideal followership. And the reason it struck me was because even for people who don't think of themselves as formal leaders, as in like I want to become the chief or I want to become the boss of this, um, everyone follows someone. You know, up into the chief, everyone reports to someone, and the role of if you think of leadership as the role of leaders is to identify the characteristics of effective followers, which include, you know, self-motivation and courage and, you know, competence. Like those are you find that they mirror leadership qualities. But it's a perspective shift where your job is to make sure that you are following in a way that's value driven or adding value to your own leader. And I've personally found myself in more followership positions than leadership positions in some ways. And so there's an opportunity for people to train. And when you, as a leader, when you start to adopt that perspective, I've found that natural natural leaders emerge. They sort of bubble up because you're looking for them and you recognize them when you see those characteristics. And another thing that I would say in my leadership philosophy is something like radical transparency. So this idea that you can be authentic with whoever it is that you are engaging with. And that looks like falling on your sword in front of your supervisor when you've messed up. It looks like apologizing to members of the public when you've lost your cool. It looks like admitting to your team when you've messed up. There's a lot of reasons and maybe a lot of ego that can prevent that in policing, where we just hope that it goes away, or you try and deflect responsibility. But in my own personal life, I've made a couple of, thank goodness, not life changing, but like a couple significant, serious errors in judgment, and I've found that like owning up to those in public, in a public environment, has been really helpful. And sort of through the LEPSL program, got a chance to apply some of the own sort of a practice exercise, saying like, hey, how would our department have fared through this turmoil if we had been more transparent? And I think the current environment is calling for police transparency, and so that starts with personal transparency. It fosters approachability, it fosters openness, and my hope is that it shows a consistency and a care for people that is the type of servant leadership I want to engage in. So,
excellent, I love it. And a lot of times people are transparent when it's convenient, but being transparent when you mess up, or taking that ownership, or when your agency did something wrong and coming forward and saying this is what we did and this is how we're going to fix it, that's huge. Thank you for sharing that. Any books or podcasts that resonate specifically that you could think of?
I would say I know it might be a little anything Simon Sinek. He kind of has a vision statement of safe, fulfilled, and inspired. So that's kind of in the same interest area as mine. I really like Adam Grant as well. So his books and his podcasts are worth a listen. They're very accessible. And I'm reading a book that's by Ian McGilchrist called The Master and His Emissary. It's about like hemispheric differences of the brain, but it's got some awesome parallels with frontline policing and sort of the way that we process things. But it's a bit wordy, so I don't know if it's a recommendation, but yeah.
Well, I think it's a recommendation for continued growth and knowledge, if anything, and for all the listeners to explore something that will allow them to expand their thinking and awareness. And Sergeant Smith, I mean, this has been great. I think it's been a very unique podcast in what you're doing, what you've achieved. Definitely going to look forward to continue to follow where you're going to go, because I'm pretty sure it's wherever you want to go. Real briefly, for the listeners and viewers who may have an interest in getting your book, is there a place you can direct them if they want to look for any of the books you've authored?
Sure. Yeah. The company that I have is called Peppermint Toast. So if you go to pepperminttoast.com, you'll find books, and then we also have our books on Amazon. So that's based on their titles. But yeah, Peppermint Toast is the name of that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for taking the time to meet the law enforcement heroes and leaders who are part of the MS Lepsel family. You can find more episodes of Blue Leadership on Facebook and YouTube. And if you'd like to learn more about the Lepsel program, visit us at criminaljustice.sandiego.edu.